All right, folks. Let's see. I don't want to spend too long on this one, but I did want to talk about one fairly important skill for probably the rest of your career, and that's the process of estimating how long it's going to take you to do things. So, obviously, when you're bidding for jobs, if you wind up in that situation, you're going to need to come up with some sort of an idea of how long it's going to take you to do the job so you can make a reasonable cost estimate so that you don't lose your shirt. So, you've got to be able to make reasonable estimates from that sort of a business perspective. If you bid too high, then you're not going to get the job. If you bid too low, then you're going to be working for peanuts. And more or less the same sort of thing is going to apply when you're working for a company someplace where they're going to turn around and say, okay, I've got this work that needs to be done or that somebody's requested a quote for or whatever it might be. Here's your part of it. How long do you think it's going to take you to do this? Or if they're simply trying to allocate who works on what projects, they're going to say, okay, well, I've got this much work to do, or I've got all these different tasks to do. How long do you think you would take to do this? Or how long, sometimes you're going to be doing estimates for somebody else. Sometimes it's going to be along the lines of, okay, how long do you think your teammate X is going to take to do this job? So again, if you're estimating too low, then you're going to wind up in a situation where you don't have enough hours to do the job. And if you estimate too high, then you're going to have a bunch of sort of wasted time floating around. So you do need to get reasonable estimation skills. And like with almost everything else, this is something that just gets better with practice. Right? The more often you try and estimate how long it's going to take you to do something, and then track how long it actually does take you to do things, then you can start getting the feel for, okay, well, I tend to overestimate these kinds of things. I tend to underestimate these kinds of things. And because you actually start tracking how long it takes you to do things, you get a better idea of how long it really does take you to do things, how long you do spend on different tasks. We often tend to think of this in terms of just coding, but it's also in terms of documentation, in terms of planning time. How long is it going to take me to plan out this aspect? How long is it going to take me to develop the test cases for something? How long is it going to take me to actually test it? All these different things, the more you do them and track how long you spend on them, the better you'll get at it. So I would tend to recommend that now, just sort of informally, for the next couple of years, whenever you're given a task, make a guesstimate as to how long you're actually going to spend on it, and then track how long you do spend on it. So that, when you get out of here a couple of years from now, you've actually got reasonable time estimation skills, and that will help you a lot in wherever you wind up working. There are a few techniques that you can try and apply to help get better at estimation. One of the most common is just sort of doing things by analogy. I think that it took me 5 hours to do this other project, and this next project looks to be about twice as long, but maybe 50% more complicated. So, multiply appropriately to get your estimate for how long this new task is going to take. There are a couple of others that crop up. Every so often, you're simply going to say, okay, well, there's only X dollars left in the budget, so I'm just going to estimate that. So it's not not realistic in a timing sense, but it does happen. And of course, there's the idea of estimating to try and win a particular contract, where you're just going to try and underbid to make sure you get it. And that might be for the sake of doing things like getting your foot in the door someplace, or if you're trying to keep a particular client happy. So there are circumstances where that kind of thing is going to crop up. If you do a little bit of searching, you're going to find lots of different places online where they've got a formula where they say, okay, plug these aspects of your project into this formula, and it'll give you a guesstimate as to how long it's going to take to do it. So those kind of categories will do things like say, okay, well, how big is it? How many thousands of lines of code do you expect it to be? How complex is it? It might include factors like how experienced you are in that area. Are there any weird unknowns? So just a whole bunch of different factors to, add or multiply together to come up with some kind of a ballpark figure. So again, it's entirely reasonable to wind up doing that sort of thing once you have a good feel for the kinds of metrics that they're looking at, in terms of what really is for you a complex project and what's a simple project, that kind of idea. Now, the only way you're going to get better at estimating is to actually track how long you spend doing things and then go back and review it later. So figure out, I estimated 5 hours for this, it actually took me 7, okay, or I estimated 3 hours for this and it took me 20. Start looking for trends in your estimation and start getting a better feel for how long different kinds of things really do take you. Now, a lot of places are going to require you to do this sort of thing once you get out of this place. So, they're going to be asking you to say, okay, well, keep track of how much time you spend on each of the different projects you're assigned to, and maybe on what aspects of the project. What were you working? Was it documentation? Was it testing? Was it code development? Was it maintenance? Was it design? Was it planning? And which project and which piece of the project was it on? So you are quite often going to have to keep track of that information, and different organizations are going to have different levels of formality for keeping track of that, and they're going to have different levels of precision too. Some might ask you to take it down to the 15-minute interval. I've heard of down to 7-minute intervals, but or others might just say round to the nearest half hour, but something so that they can keep track of where they should be billing their time. All right, so if you're going to do that, it's possible that if it's something formal, if it's for a team, for an organization someplace, then it's entirely likely that they've got a web form someplace there where you go in and enter your data. Something where they've got a fixed format that you enter the information in. For the next couple of years, if you're doing this kind of thing yourself, really I would suggest just keeping track of 4 pieces of information when you're going on, or I guess 5 pieces. So what day were you working on it? What time did you start working on something? What time did you finish? And then an estimate of how many interruptions you had in there. So you might say, okay, well, I started at noon, I finished at 5, and I figure I had about an hour of interruptions in there. So you actually wound up with 4 hours of working time on it. And that's easier to sort of keep track of than, again, if this is relatively informal, it's easier to keep track of that than saying, okay, well, I worked on this from 12 to 1:15, and then I had a 30-minute interruption, and then from 1:45 to 1:45, and then I had a 15-minute interruption, and then so it's just an easy way to jot down and keep track of things. And again, if you can do this over the next couple of years, you will find yourself in a better place for doing this kind of thing when you have to do it for somebody that's paying you to do this kind of thing. All right, I think that was really all I wanted to say on it. You'll undoubtedly come back and look at this kind of thing more in things like the systems analysis course, but yeah, I'll leave it there for now.